My sister demanded $300 baby shower gifts and sent Venmo reminders when people didn't pay. The text came through at 11:30 on a Sunday night. My phone buzzed against the nightstand, and I grabbed it without thinking, assuming it was work. Instead, I saw my cousin Olivia's name and a screenshot that made my stomach drop. It was a Venmo request from my sister Natalie. $300. The note read, "Baby shower gift. Second reminder. Payment overdue by 8 days. Please remit immediately to avoid further action." I stared at those words until they blurred. Further action. My sister was threatening our family members over baby shower gifts like she was a collections agency. I called Olivia immediately, and when she answered, her voice was tight with anger. She told me she wasn't the only one. Natalie had sent nearly identical requests to 18 people, including our 72-year-old grandmother who lived on Social Security. That's when I knew something had gone catastrophically wrong with my sister, and I was about to find out exactly how deep the damage went. Let me back up 6 months, because that's when the first cracks started showing. Natalie had always been high maintenance. Growing up, she was the golden child who got everything she wanted, while I learned early that asking for things meant hearing about budgets and responsibility. Our parents had their reasons, I guess. She was the youngest by 4 years, born after our mom had 2 miscarriages. They treated her like she was made of glass wrapped in gold leaf. By the time she was 16, she had a newer car than our father. When she went to college, they paid for everything including her sorority dues and spring break trips. Meanwhile, I worked 3 jobs to get through state school. I'm not bitter about it anymore. I made peace with the dynamic years ago, but it created a monster neither of them wanted to acknowledge. Natalie never learned the word no, and she certainly never learned what things actually cost. She floated through life expecting the world to arrange itself around her desires, and for 28 years, it mostly did. When she announced her pregnancy last year, I was genuinely happy for her. Her husband Austin seemed like a decent guy, worked in pharmaceutical sales, made good money. They lived in a nice subdivision about 20 minutes from our parents. Everything looked perfect from the outside, which should have been my first warning sign. Natalie's life always looked perfect. Her Instagram was a carefully curated gallery of aesthetic brunch photos, designer handbags, and inspirational quotes about manifestation and abundance. She had 14,000 followers who thought she was living some kind of influencer dream. What they didn't see was the credit card debt, the constant borrowing from our parents, the way she'd ask to borrow money and then act offended when you asked about paying it back. I'd learned to say no years ago, which made me the difficult brother who didn't support family. But I had my own life, my own bills, and I'd be damned if I was going to fund her lifestyle while she posted about how blessed she was. The baby shower announcement came in February, delivered via a professionally designed digital invitation that probably cost more than it should have. The theme was, "A little prince is on his way," complete with gold crowns and royal blue accents. It was scheduled for a Saturday afternoon at some upscale event venue downtown. The invitation mentioned that Natalie had registered at 3 different stores with links provided. I clicked through out of curiosity and nearly choked. The suggested items started at $100 and went up from there. A designer diaper bag for $450, a smart bassinet for $1,600, a gold-plated baby spoon set for $275. I called my girlfriend Melissa over to look at the screen, and she just whistled low. "Is she expecting people to go in on gifts together, or is she out of her mind?" she asked. I told her I honestly didn't know anymore, but I was planning to buy something reasonable and call it a day. Something in the $50 range seemed appropriate for an uncle. Melissa agreed, and we ordered a nice set of baby books and some practical onesies. We thought that was the end of it. 2 weeks before the shower, Natalie called me. I was at work, reviewing construction plans for a commercial project, when her name flashed across my screen. I almost didn't answer, but something told me I should. Her voice had that particular tone she used when she wanted something, sweet and slightly wounded, like you'd already disappointed her, but she was giving you a chance to make it right. She asked if I'd seen her registry, and I said yes. Melissa and I had already ordered a gift. There was a pause, and then she said the thing that should have ended the conversation right there. "Oh, well, actually, I've implemented a new system. Everyone's contributing $300, and Austin and I will purchase everything ourselves. It's more efficient, and it ensures we get exactly what we need." I remember sitting there in my truck, phone pressed to my ear, trying to process what I'd just heard. I asked her to repeat that, certain I'd misunderstood. She did, speaking slowly like I was simple. $300 per guest, non-negotiable. It was about investing in her child's future and showing up for family. I told her no, just flat out, no. I'd already bought a gift, and $300 was an insane amount to demand from anyone, let alone expect as a baseline. She went quiet for a moment, and then her voice changed, got colder. She told me that everyone else had agreed, that I was being selfish, that this was her first child, and she deserved to feel celebrated. I pointed out that demanding money wasn't celebrating, it was extortion. She hung up on me. For the next 3 days, my phone blew up with texts from her. Long paragraphs about how I'd always been jealous of her, how I'd never supported her dreams, how I was ruining what should be a joyful time. I stopped reading them after the first few. Melissa told me to block her number, but I didn't want to cause a family war. I figured she'd calm down, realize how ridiculous she was being, and we'd move past it. I was wrong about that. I was wrong about a lot of things. The shower happened without me. I didn't attend, and neither did Melissa. I sent Natalie a text the day before, explaining that we wouldn't be coming, that we didn't agree with her payment demands, and that we hoped she had a lovely celebration anyway. She read it and didn't respond. I heard from our mother that the shower was beautiful, that Natalie looked radiant, that everything was perfect. I bit my tongue and said I was glad. What I wanted to ask was whether Mom had noticed that half the guest list hadn't shown up, but I knew better. Our mother had a gift for selective blindness when it came to Natalie. If she saw a problem, she'd have to address it, and addressing it might mean confronting her precious youngest daughter. Easier to pretend everything was fine and blame me for being difficult. It was a family tradition at this point. That brings us back to that Sunday night, to Olivia's call and the screenshot that changed everything. After I hung up with her, I started making calls. First to my other cousin James, who confirmed he'd gotten the same Venmo request. Then to my Aunt Linda, who'd received hers 3 days earlier and had been losing sleep over whether to pay it. She was on a fixed income, retired from teaching, and $300 was her grocery budget for 6 weeks. She'd already sent Natalie $100, everything she could afford, and gotten back a message saying partial payments weren't accepted. My aunt was in tears on the phone, apologizing to me like she'd done something wrong. I told her to stop, that none of this was her fault, that Natalie was completely out of line. Then I called 6 more people. Every single one had received a request. Every single one had been berated or guilt-tripped for not paying immediately. My sister had systematically gone through her shower guest list and sent payment demands to everyone who hadn't handed over $300 in cash at the event. But here's what made it worse. The people who had paid at the shower had paid in checks or cash. There was no record, no receipt. And now some of them were getting Venmo requests too, claiming they'd never paid at all. My college friend Daniel, who I'd helped get an engineering job 2 years ago, had given Natalie $300 in cash personally. He remembered because he'd had to go to the ATM twice to get it, and she'd counted it in front of him. Now she was saying she had no record of his payment and demanding he pay again via Venmo for tracking purposes. When he pushed back, she'd sent him a screenshot of her Venmo transaction history showing no payment from him, as if that proved anything. He'd paid cash. The Venmo history was irrelevant, but she was using it as evidence that he was lying, and she'd posted in a private Facebook group about people who make promises and don't follow through, clearly referring to him without using his name. I spent that entire Monday documenting everything. I created a spreadsheet with every person I could reach, what they'd paid, if anything, what they'd been asked for, and what threats or guilt trips they'd received. The pattern was stunning. Natalie had invited 53 people to her shower. 19 had attended and paid in cash or check. Of those 19, she was now claiming 12 hadn't paid and owed her money. The other 34 people who hadn't attended were getting aggressive Venmo requests with threats of further action. When I added it up, if everyone paid what she was demanding, she'd collect over $15,000 for a baby shower, for gifts she was supposed to receive, not cash she could spend however she wanted. My hands were shaking as I looked at that number. $15,000 extracted from friends and family through threats and lies. This wasn't entitlement anymore. This was fraud. I called Austin that night. He was my brother-in-law, and while we weren't close, he'd always seemed reasonable. I figured maybe he didn't know what Natalie was doing, or maybe he could talk sense into her. He answered on the 4th ring, sounding tired. I asked if we could talk about the baby shower situation, and there was a long pause. Then he said, in this flat, defeated voice, that he'd told her to stop. He'd begged her to stop. She wouldn't listen. He'd found out about the Venmo requests 3 days ago when his own mother called him crying. His mother, who had already bought them a $1,500 crib as a shower gift, had received a Venmo request for $300 with a note saying, mandatory contribution, no exceptions. Austin had confronted Natalie. They'd had a massive fight, and she'd locked herself in the nursery for 6 hours. When she finally came out, she'd told him that he didn't understand financial planning, that she was securing their son's future, and that everyone was overreacting. Austin told me something else, something that made the whole picture snap into focus. They were broke. Not just tight on money, but genuinely, catastrophically broke. Natalie's Instagram life was built entirely on credit cards and loans. They were $68,000 in debt, spread across 9 different credit cards, 2 personal loans, and a line of credit she'd taken out against their house without telling him. He'd discovered it 2 months ago when a payment bounced and the bank called him. The baby expenses had pushed everything over the edge. She'd spent $23,000 on nursery furniture, decorations, and baby clothes before he was even born. Designer everything. She'd bought a stroller that cost more than my first car. And now the bills were coming due, creditors were calling, and she'd convinced herself that the solution was to make other people pay for it. In her mind, she deserved this. She deserved the perfect nursery, the perfect baby wardrobe, the perfect life. And if she couldn't afford it herself, well, that's what family and friends were for. I asked Austin what he was going to do. He said he didn't know. He loved her, the baby was coming in 6 weeks, and he felt trapped. Part of me wanted to yell at him for enabling this, but I could hear the exhaustion in his voice. He was drowning too. I told him that what Natalie was doing was illegal, that demanding payment for gifts people already gave was fraud, that threatening people was harassment. He knew. He'd already consulted a lawyer friend who'd confirmed it. But pressing charges against your pregnant wife, the mother of your unborn child, while her entire family would turn against you? He couldn't do it. I understood, even if I didn't agree. We ended the call with Austin promising to try talking to her again, and me promising not to blow everything up publicly until he'd had a chance. I gave him 48 hours. I shouldn't have waited even that long, because Natalie escalated. On Wednesday morning, my grandmother called me. She was crying so hard I could barely understand her. Natalie had shown up at her house unannounced, demanded the $300 in person, and when my grandmother explained she couldn't afford it, Natalie had called her selfish, had told her own grandmother that if she really loved her great-grandson, she'd find a way to pay, had implied that my grandmother was choosing to withhold support out of spite. My grandmother, who had raised 4 kids on a teacher's salary and a mechanic's wages, who had never asked anyone for anything, was sitting in her kitchen at 82 years old, sobbing because her granddaughter had made her feel worthless. That's when I decided I was done protecting Natalie, done making excuses, done waiting for her to magically develop a conscience. I called a lawyer that afternoon. Her name was Patricia Vance, and she'd handled a harassment case for my company the year before. I laid out everything: the demands, the lies about payments, the threats, the targeting of elderly family members. She listened without interrupting, and when I finished, she said something I'll never forget. Your sister isn't just entitled. She's running a systematic con, and she's documenting it herself. People go to prison for less than this. Patricia explained my options: civil harassment suit, fraud charges, elder abuse claims on behalf of my grandmother. The fact that everything was documented via Venmo and text messages made it a prosecutor's dream case. But she also warned me about the fallout: family fractures, media attention if it went to trial, the stress on my pregnant sister and her unborn child. I told her I understood all of that, but I couldn't let her keep victimizing people. We discussed a middle path: a formal cease and desist letter detailing the illegal nature of her actions, threatening criminal charges if she didn't immediately stop all collection attempts and return any money obtained through false claims. It would give her one chance to stop before things got nuclear. Patricia drafted it that night, and we had it hand-delivered to Natalie's house on Thursday morning by a process server. I wanted there to be no question that this was serious, no room for her to claim she didn't understand or didn't know better. She was being officially notified that her actions were criminal, and she needed to stop immediately. The response came faster than I expected. Natalie posted a 4-paragraph screed on Facebook, not naming me, but making it crystal clear who she was talking about. She wrote about betrayal, about family members who tear you down when you're trying to build a life, about jealousy and toxicity. She painted herself as a victim of my cruelty, a pregnant woman just trying to prepare for her child while her own brother attacked her with lawyers. The comments section filled up with sympathy from people who didn't know the full story. Her followers rallied around her, calling me every name you can imagine. My phone started getting calls from extended family members demanding to know why I was making Natalie's pregnancy stressful. My mother called, crying, begging me to drop the legal action and just talk to your sister like family. I tried explaining what Natalie had actually done, but she didn't want to hear it. In her mind, Natalie was pregnant and vulnerable, and I was being vindictive. The golden child narrative was so deeply embedded that even documented evidence wouldn't shake it. But something unexpected happened. People started coming forward. Quietly, through direct messages and private calls, the truth began spreading. Olivia posted her own Facebook response, not tagging Natalie, but sharing the screenshots of the Venmo demands and explaining what had really happened. James did the same. Within 24 hours, 11 different people had shared their experiences. The narrative flipped. Suddenly, it wasn't about a cruel brother attacking his pregnant sister. It was about a pattern of financial manipulation and abuse. People who'd stayed quiet, embarrassed, or afraid found their voices. A friend from Natalie's college days posted about how Natalie had borrowed $2,000 for emergency medical expenses 3 years ago and never paid it back. A former co-worker shared a story about Natalie organizing a group vacation, collecting deposits from everyone, then canceling last minute and refusing to refund the money. The pile of evidence grew. This wasn't a one-time baby shower disaster. This was how Natalie operated. She took money, made promises, and then either disappeared or turned herself into the victim when people asked for accountability. If this story keeps your interest, please subscribe to get more stories like this. The breaking point came on Saturday, 9 days after my initial phone call with Olivia. A journalist named Rebecca Ford reached out to me via LinkedIn. She worked for a local news station and had seen the Facebook posts. She was working on a story about online scams and financial manipulation within families, and she wanted to interview me. I was hesitant at first. Talking to the media felt like crossing a line I couldn't uncross. But Rebecca explained that she'd already spoken with 6 other people from Natalie's shower list, that the story was happening whether I participated or not, and that my perspective as a family member trying to stop the abuse would be valuable. She sent me her credentials: 12 years in investigative journalism, 3 regional Emmy Awards, a track record of holding people accountable. I talked to Patricia, who said it was my decision, but advised me to be careful and stick to facts. I agreed to meet Rebecca for coffee the next day. The interview lasted 2 hours. Rebecca recorded everything with my permission, took extensive notes, and asked questions I hadn't even considered. She wanted to know about Natalie's childhood, our family dynamic, when the entitled behavior started. She asked about our parents' response, about Austin's financial situation, about whether I thought Natalie understood what she was doing was wrong. That last question stuck with me. Did Natalie genuinely not understand that extorting family members was unacceptable? Or did she understand perfectly well and simply not care because she'd never faced real consequences before? I told Rebecca I honestly didn't know anymore. The sister I grew up with wouldn't have threatened our grandmother over money. But maybe I'd never really known her at all. Maybe the mask had just finally slipped, and this was who she'd always been underneath the Instagram filters and inspirational quotes. Rebecca's story aired on Wednesday Evening News. I watched it from my living room with Melissa beside me, my stomach in knots. It was professionally done, balanced, but damning. Rebecca had gotten interviews with 5 of Natalie's victims, including my grandmother, who spoke with quiet dignity about feeling heartbroken and confused. She'd obtained screenshots of the Venmo requests, the threatening messages, the Facebook posts. She'd reached out to Natalie for comment, but Natalie had declined. Austin had also declined. The story presented the facts clearly. A woman had demanded money from baby shower guests, then sent aggressive collection notices when people didn't pay, including to people who had already paid. The legal experts Rebecca interviewed explained that while baby registries were common, demanding specific cash amounts and threatening consequences for non-payment crossed into potential harassment and fraud territory. The story went viral locally within hours. By the next morning, it had been picked up by 3 national news outlets. My phone became unusable. Calls, texts, messages from people I hadn't spoken to in years. Some were supportive. Many were angry, accusing me of destroying my sister for attention. The family group chat exploded. My mother wrote that I'd ruined Natalie's life, that the stress could harm the baby, that I should be ashamed. My father stayed silent, which somehow felt worse than my mother's rage. But amid the chaos, something important happened. People who'd been quietly suffering under Natalie's manipulation found validation. The friend who'd lost $2,000 years ago filed a small claims court case. 3 of the baby shower guests filed formal complaints with the police. My grandmother, with Patricia's help, filed for a restraining order. The district attorney's office opened an investigation into possible fraud and elder abuse charges. What had started as me trying to protect my family from a shakedown had turned into something much bigger. Public accountability for someone who'd operated without consequences her entire life. Natalie responded the only way she knew how. She played victim harder. She went on a local podcast to tell her side of the story, painting herself as a pregnant woman being attacked by a vindictive family member and a sensationalist media. She cried on camera, talked about betrayal and cruelty, claimed that people were twisting innocent gift registry suggestions into some kind of criminal enterprise. She never mentioned the Venmo requests with threatening language, never addressed the people she'd accused of not paying when they had, never acknowledged going to my grandmother's house to demand money in person. Instead, she focused on her vulnerability, her pregnancy, the stress this was causing. The podcast interviewer didn't push back hard, clearly sympathetic to the pregnant woman in distress. It might have worked if it had been the only story out there. But it wasn't. The evidence was everywhere, screenshots and bank records and witness statements. Her tears couldn't erase the paper trail. The legal consequences came in waves. First, the restraining order against contacting my grandmother was approved. Then, the district attorney filed formal charges, 3 counts of fraud, 5 counts of harassment, and 1 count of attempted elder abuse. Patricia explained that the elder abuse charge was the most serious, carrying up to 4 years in prison if convicted. Austin filed for separation 2 days after the charges were announced. He released a brief statement saying he hadn't known the full extent of his wife's actions, that he'd tried to intervene, and that he needed to protect his son and his own financial future. He moved in with his parents and filed for emergency custody before the baby was even born. It was brutal to watch, even knowing Natalie had brought it entirely on herself. This was a family imploding in real time, broadcast across local news and social media. The baby was born in late April, 6 weeks after the story first broke. A healthy boy, 8 pounds, 9 ounces. Austin was there for the birth. So were Natalie's parents. I wasn't invited, obviously. I found out through a Facebook post Natalie made from her hospital room, a filtered photo of the baby's tiny hand wrapped around her finger, caption about unconditional love and new beginnings. The comments were disabled. 3 days later, Austin was granted temporary full custody pending the criminal trial. Natalie was allowed supervised visitation. The court cited the ongoing fraud investigation and concerns about her judgment. She moved back in with our parents, who hired an expensive defense attorney and mortgaged their house to pay for it. My mother still wasn't speaking to me. She blamed me for everything, the charges, the custody battle, the media attention. In her mind, if I'd just let Natalie collect her shower money and kept my mouth shut, none of this would have happened. The preliminary hearing happened in June. I wasn't required to testify, but I attended. Sat in the back of the courtroom and watched as the prosecution laid out their case. They'd done their homework. Financial records showing the debt, the spending patterns, the timeline of desperation. Testimony from victims, including a tearful statement from my grandmother that made 3 people in the gallery cry. Screenshots of every threatening message, every false claim, every manipulative guilt trip. The defense tried to argue that this was a misunderstanding, that Natalie had poor judgment and made mistakes, but hadn't committed crimes. The prosecutor countered with the definition of fraud, intentionally deceiving people for financial gain. Natalie had lied about people not paying. She'd threatened consequences that implied legal action. She'd targeted vulnerable family members, including an elderly woman on a fixed income. The intent was clear, the pattern was established, and the evidence was overwhelming. Natalie took a plea deal in August. Patricia had warned me this would probably happen. Going to trial meant risking the maximum sentence. The plea offered her a way out with reduced charges. 2 counts of fraud, guilty. 1 count of harassment, guilty. The elder abuse charge was dropped. Her sentence, 18 months in prison, suspended to 6 months with 3 years probation. Mandatory financial counseling. Restitution to all victims, totaling $22,000, including what she'd collected and refused to return. A formal apology letter to each person she'd defrauded, filed with the court. Austin was granted full legal custody, with Natalie allowed supervised visitation after completing her sentence. She'd served the 6 months in county jail starting in September, after the baby turned 5 months old. The judge told her that she'd shown a pattern of manipulating people who loved her, that she'd weaponized her pregnancy and her family relationships to escape accountability, and that she was fortunate the court was being lenient given the severity of her actions. Natalie stood there in her designer dress, purchased on credit, I'm sure, and nodded. She didn't cry, didn't apologize, just nodded. I saw her once more before she started her sentence. She showed up at my apartment unannounced, managed to get past the building security by telling them she was my sister and I was expecting her. I wasn't. I opened my door to find her standing in the hallway, and my first instinct was to call the police. But she looked so small standing there, so different from the polished Instagram version or the defiant courtroom defendant. She asked if we could talk. I should have said no, should have closed the door and called Patricia. Instead, I let her in. We sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd built the spreadsheet documenting her fraud. She didn't apologize, not exactly. She said she'd made mistakes, that things had gotten out of control, that she'd been stressed and scared about money. She asked if I felt good about destroying her life. I told her I hadn't destroyed anything. She'd done that herself. I'd just stopped letting her destroy everyone else along the way. She left after 20 minutes. Didn't get what she came for, whatever that was. Maybe she'd wanted me to say it was all okay, that I forgave her, that family comes first. I couldn't give her that. Too many people had been hurt. My grandmother had stress-induced heart palpitations for 2 months. Olivia had panic attacks about money. Friends had lost savings they couldn't afford to lose. And Natalie had felt entitled to all of it, had felt wronged when people resisted. Even now, sitting in my kitchen, she couldn't fully acknowledge what she'd done. She framed it as mistakes and stress, not choices and consequences. I think that's when I finally let go of the sister I remembered from childhood. That person, if she'd ever really existed, was gone. What remained was someone I didn't know and couldn't trust. Natalie served her 6 months, got out in March due to good behavior and overcrowding. She's living with our parents, working a retail job to make restitution payments, seeing her son 3 times a week for supervised 2-hour visits. Austin has full custody and is dating someone new, a nurse he met at a support group for parents. They seem happy from what I can see on social media. The baby is healthy, hitting all his milestones, surrounded by people who love him. Our parents still don't speak to me. My mother sends Christmas cards addressed only to Melissa, like I don't exist. I've made peace with that. Some relationships can't survive honesty. Some people would rather blame the person who exposed the problem than deal with the problem itself. I think about it sometimes, about whether I'd do things differently if I could go back. The answer is no. Someone had to stop her. Someone had to say that love doesn't mean funding someone's delusions or enabling their worst impulses. My grandmother shouldn't have had to choose between groceries and appeasing her granddaughter's demands. Friends shouldn't have been threatened and manipulated. Natalie needed consequences, real ones, the kind our parents never gave her. Maybe she'll learn from this. Maybe she'll develop actual empathy and self-awareness. But that's not my responsibility anymore. I did what I had to do to protect people who couldn't protect themselves. Everything that happened after was Natalie's choice, Natalie's actions, Natalie's consequences. Last month, I got a message from someone I didn't know, a woman named Julia who'd been friends with Natalie in college. She thanked me for speaking up, told me that Natalie had borrowed $1,500 from her 7 years ago for emergency rent and disappeared when Julia asked for it back. She'd always felt guilty about that, like maybe she should have been more understanding. But seeing the pattern, seeing that she wasn't alone, gave her closure. She wasn't a bad friend who abandoned someone in need. She was a target who got away. Her message ended with something that stuck with me. Some people count on family loyalty to get away with anything. Thank you for choosing integrity instead. I screenshot that message. Saved it for the days when doubt creeps in, when I wonder if I was too harsh, if I should have tried harder to help Natalie instead of holding her accountable. Then I remember my grandmother crying in her kitchen. Remember the single mother who'd paid twice because she was afraid of what Natalie would do if she didn't. Remember all the people who suffered because one person felt entitled to their money and their silence. The last time I saw the baby was 3 months ago. Austin invited me to his son's first birthday party. It was a small gathering. Austin, his girlfriend, his parents, a few close friends. Natalie wasn't there. It wasn't her visitation day. I held my nephew for the first time, this beautiful kid with Austin's eyes and Natalie's nose, and felt this complicated mix of love and grief. Love for this innocent life who deserved better than the chaos he was born into. Grief for the family that could have been, should have been, if Natalie had ever learned that other people weren't resources to extract value from. Austin thanked me before I left. Said he knew it couldn't have been easy, that he appreciated me not backing down even when everyone turned against me. I told him the truth. It hadn't been about being right or winning. It had been about stopping someone from hurting people I cared about. He understood. We're building something like friendship now, bonding over shared trauma and a mutual desire to protect this kid from his mother's worst impulses. Sometimes people ask me if I regret how public everything became. The news coverage, the viral posts, the permanent internet record of my family's dysfunction. The answer is complicated. I regret that it was necessary. I regret that Natalie pushed things so far that legal action and media exposure became the only way to stop her. But I don't regret the outcome. She's getting help she desperately needed. The people she defrauded got their money back. My grandmother sleeps better at night knowing she's protected by a court order. The baby is safe and loved and surrounded by stability. Would I have preferred to handle this privately? Of course. But Natalie made that impossible the moment she decided her wants mattered more than everyone else's well-being. You can't reason with someone who views empathy as weakness and boundaries as personal attacks. There's a version of this story where I'm the villain, where I'm the cruel brother who destroyed his pregnant sister's life over money. My mother tells that version to anyone who'll listen. In her story, I'm vindictive and jealous, unable to let Natalie have her moment of happiness. I've stopped trying to correct that narrative. People believe what they want to believe, see what they want to see. The people who matter, the ones who actually witnessed what happened, know the truth. Everyone else can think what they like. I've learned that being right matters less than being at peace with your choices. And I am. I'm at peace with standing up when it was easier to stay silent, with choosing the hard right over the easy wrong, with loving my family enough to stop enabling their worst member. If there's a lesson in all this, it's that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to participate in someone's self-destruction. Natalie didn't need $300 from 53 people. She needed someone to say no, to draw a line, to force her to face reality instead of continuing to build her life on other people's resources and goodwill. Our parents never gave her that. They enabled every impulse, funded every whim, made excuses for every failure. They created someone who genuinely believed the world owed her whatever she wanted. I couldn't save her from that, but I could stop her from dragging everyone else down with her. That's all I ever tried to do. A year and a half has passed since that Sunday night phone call from Olivia. I'm still here, still living my life, still going to work and paying my bills and building something real with Melissa. We got engaged last month, small proposal in the park, where we had our first date. No demands for $300 gifts, no Venmo payment schedules. Just two people who've chosen each other, who understand that love is built on mutual respect and honest communication, not entitlement and manipulation. Natalie won't be at the wedding. Neither will my parents, most likely. That hurts less than I expected it to. You grieve the family you wanted and accept the family you have. Mine is smaller now, but it's healthier. Everyone in it knows they're valued for who they are, not what they can provide. The story still comes up sometimes. Someone will recognize my name, connect the dots, ask if I'm that guy from the baby shower fraud case. I've learned to handle it gracefully. Yes, that's my sister. Yes, it was a difficult situation. No, I don't regret how I handled it. Then I changed the subject. I'm not defined by Natalie's choices or the consequences that followed. I'm defined by how I responded when someone I loved weaponized that love against vulnerable people. I chose them over her. I chose truth over comfort. I chose accountability over family harmony built on silence and dysfunction. Those choices cost me relationships I'll never get back. They also gave me clarity about who I am and what I stand for. That's worth more than my mother's approval or Natalie's forgiveness could ever be. So here I am, on the other side of the worst family crisis of my life. Scarred but intact. Changed but not broken. I think about my nephew sometimes, growing up with Austin and his girlfriend, visiting his mother in structured, supervised settings. I hope he turns out okay. Hope he learns early what Natalie never did. That people aren't ATMs. That love isn't transactional. That the world doesn't revolve around your wants. Hope he breaks the cycle that's run through my family for too long. And if he ever asks why his uncle isn't around much, why there's distance and history and complicated feelings, I hope Austin tells him the truth. Not the sanitized version, not the villain story. The real one. About how sometimes you have to love people enough to stop them, even when it costs you everything. Thanks for watching till the end. Make sure to subscribe and like to not miss the next story.